In a second. There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Happy Thursday. All right, guys, I'm so excited to spend some time with you today. And wow, I have a great show for you a great show in store for you today, and really looking forward to delving into one of my absolute favorite topics in the entire world. And honestly, this is something that was a real life changer for me, both on a personal level as well as a professional level. We're going to talk about coaching. And specifically, I'm really happy and so honored to be joined today by Jeff Lougheed from Meal Garden. All right. So, what's super cool about Jeff, very multifaceted individual, as you will soon find out for yourself. But the really interesting thing is, Jeff has a master's degree in, I believe it's executive coaching, right, Jeff? I mean, there might
Yes.
be maybe a different, is it executive coaching specifically?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. All right. So Jeff is an expert in terms of the coaching process, right? And specifically, what we're going to talk about today is how to ask powerful questions, right? So, powerful questions as your secret weapon for increased patient success. And I know many of you have training in, um, you know, a variety of different, not exactly coaching, but how to ask good questions in your sessions, right? So today we're going to delve in a little bit deeper, and I think you're going to walk away with some really super helpful tools designed to help make your sessions more effective, right? And remember, coaching, and we'll delve into this a little bit more too, but just as kind of a high level overview, the coaching process is really different as compared to our traditional practitioner type of training, right? So in our practitioner training, we are really trained to step in as the expert, right? Like, do as I say kind of approach. And really, the big difference with coaching is it's really the opposite, right? We're entering into a collaborative type of relationship with the client, and they are actually the expert in their own bodies. So a really important aspect of that is asking super powerful questions to help move that patient or client forward. So I'm really super excited to have this conversation today. So you're going to learn 3 strategies that you can incorporate into your conversations to help your patients and clients transform their lives. All right, Jeff. So happy to have you. I know we've had some amazing conversations behind the scenes on this very topic. So I am delighted to have you here today so that we can kind of share, some of our joint knowledge, our perspective on this incredible topic with our audience. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Leslie. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be with everyone here. I put something together a little bit here. So let me see.
Great.
2 monitors. Okay, I can't do that. Like this.
Right.
Mm,
Okay, so I can add to stream. All right.
Can you see my screen?
I can. The tech gods
Okay.
are cooperating. Love that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is actually the reason there's no this is actually a quote that I came up with. This is something that I've found to be true in all facets of my life, and really was illuminated to me through my experiences with my graduate certificate in executive coaching and all the work I did after that. So, real quick, I'm Jeff, and my primary role right now is I help health professionals increase their impact through nutrition. That's what I do at Meal Garden. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm also a certified executive coach through the International Coaching Federation. So don't focus full
Amazing.
time on executive coaching, but I do, I have friends in the executive world that come to me and we will do short engagements or, my real passion is around kind of revenue enablement, sales enablement. So I coach various kind of up and coming salespeople and things like that on how to be effective in their framing and questioning, right? This was the program that I took. After I had a very successful exit from a very large technology company, and it's about 6, 7 years ago now. And I had a choice of doing an MBA, right, or doing a graduate degree in executive coaching. And the reason I chose executive coaching was I was lucky enough in my experience at the building a technology company to have a senior leadership team that was really, really, really into coaching. And it was very stressful when, we grew very fast. We got ourselves into some pretty interesting situations. And although it was very stressful when we would go to the executives with, hey, how are we going to deliver on this thing that we've did? Rather than ever giving us directions, they would always coach, which is kind of stressful when you're in a delivery situation, but it also was very empowering to be able to figure out your own solution. So I decided to do this graduate certificate. It was 8 months. We had to read about 20 books and all kinds of like really intense kind of master's level stuff. We also had to find and secure actual coaching clients during this time. And we would do, I think we did about 50 or 60 hours of live coaching and had feedback sessions on that. So it's really interesting. And this is what kind of laid the foundation for my life moving forward, right? This kind of concept of coaching and asking questions. So, just a quick frame, because, I'm from Mill Garden and I've actually done a few of these conversations. I've never really talked about my worldview and kind of how I got into this industry and what I think is interesting. And I believe that we're in an interesting time in the world where health has become much more important to people, and the health industry itself is under a tremendous amount of pressure. I think it's always been under pressure, but the pressure is growing, right? From all kinds of different angles, all kinds of different ways. And, I believe the modern health practitioner actually wears a lot of different hats, and is responsible for a lot of different moving parts. Figuring out somebody's health is not, it's not easy, right? There's lots of different pieces to that. So what Meal Garden does is we focus on these areas here, customers and nutrition, and we're moving into this area and really making it easier for you as a modern health professional to focus on this idea, right? Uncovering motivations, so root cause analysis, visualizing action plans versus creating action plans, and identifying accountability. So really employing those kind of principles of coaching to drive forward, to get your patients or customers to where they need to be. One of the things that I think are the three kind of keys to us succeeding in our role of making the world a healthier place is, balancing automation with personalization, creating better feedback loops for you as the practitioner, and really believing in the power community. To me, you will never be able to replace the humans learn from humans. That's the most effective way to learn. If a human is in a very difficult or scary situation, the best thing for them is another human to work through that. So I get AI, I get machine learning and all these things. I think humans will always have a part in this, and coaching is especially more effective in a human environment. Okay. So these are the goals for today. We're going to talk through, give a better understanding of what a conversation is, what active listening is, what coaching is and isn't. I think this will be a really fun conversation because I see people using coaching, just throwing the term coaching around all over the place. And I think it's helpful to understand when we're coaching and when we're not coaching. We'll dive deep into creating and asking questions. So really the steps into asking questions. We'll talk about why. I think we'll have a really fun conversation around why, because that's a powerful question, but also a really dangerous one. And then we'll look at some new and exciting concepts in coaching. So I'm going to share some of my coaching notes, my actual feedback that I got during my sessions, as well as some frameworks that I think are interesting for you as a coach to kind of help guide those conversations, right? And essentially we'll come up with 3 strategies for better coaching conversations. Before we get going, and Leslie, I'm gonna need a little help from you here because I don't have 2 screens, so I can't really see anything, but I thought we might ask the audience or people who join us here, just anybody who has a list of questions, like a coaching question syllabus or list, in their work area, on their phone, that they use on a regular basis while they're guiding clients through their engagements.
So like a list of great questions to pull from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have that? Like otherwise known as like a question deck
Yep.
or just simply, a list of awesome questions that you can kind of pull from on the, during your calls. Ooh, Karen Kennedy. Hey, Karen. So Karen says no, and I'm so interested to learn more. Incredible.
Oh,
So I can say I don't. I just pull it from my head.
okay.
Oh,
Okay. That's
yeah,
great. Okay. So this is we got a greenfield opportunity here, Leslie,
yeah,
it sounds like.
we do. Okay,
Um,
so Tammy. Hey, Tammy. No list of questions to ask. Ask questions out of curiosity. That's great. Yep. So that I would say that is pretty much my approach as well. So I'm excited about this. I'm gonna actually learn a few things myself.
okay. So let's talk about how effective conversation's happening. Okay. And this is really kind of a muddled down version, but you have a sender, they have a message, they send it to receiver, and you get feedback, right? This is how conversations happen around the world throughout time. When you apply active listening to a conversation like this, that's really the idea of confirmations, you change the way conversations happening. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example of that. And this is on the top end as well as the back end as a coach. So the coach is the sender. Okay. The first thing you can do in any conversation is actually request the opportunity to have the conversation. So, at a very simple level, can I ask you a question? What that does is it changes the receiver's cognitive mode. So, if you're talking to a client, if you ask that first introductory phrase before the more important question, you're confirming that they're paying attention. You're actually engaging their active listening, which and active listening goes both ways, right? As a coach or a practitioner, we want to employ active listening. You also want to make sure that your customer or patient is actively listening as well. So the first thing to do is really kind of start introducing these confirmations. Can I ask you a question? Are we ready to move on? Is there anything else? These types of things help the mind engage and really kind of absorb. Okay, and that's on the messaging side. On the feedback side, it's really summarization. This is what I heard.
Hmm.
Is a great example of that. This is what I heard you saying, or let me play back what I've heard. These types of little introductions in that message kind of flywheel help to ensure both parties are employing active listening. And I don't, is active listening a term, Leslie, that you're familiar with
Yeah,
and kind of something that's, yeah, okay, cool. So
yeah.
we're all familiar with active
I think
listening.
so. Everyone familiar with that? Give me a yes or a no in the comments. I'm pretty sure, but
Yeah.
I'd want to check in on that. Okay.
I think, Leslie, the one thing that I've found through these conversations in my studies is that we, as the coach, we understand active listening from our side.
Yeah.
The interesting part or the kind of tidbit of information is the idea of ensuring that the receiver or your customer is actively listening, right? So those
Ah,
little cues are how you can ensure that your customer or patient or well, that
yeah,
term, your coachee, I guess we'll call
yeah,
them, is actually actively listening as well. Because that's like as a coach, you want to be an active listener, obviously, but if your coachee isn't actively listening, they're not going to be able to respond to your questions
yeah.
effectively. They're not going to be able to absorb the information or really get to root cause thinking, right? So it's those little tidbits in a conversation that really help those conversations to kind of have impact, right? Okay.
Love that. Yeah, and Karen is familiar with that concept. And
Okay,
I'm
great. Good
familiar
stuff.
with it too, but I don't think I've heard it framed in the way you just put it, in
Yep.
terms of
Yep.
doing these check-in questions as a mechanism to ensure, to the degree possible, that you're getting dual active listening from both participants. So that's pretty cool.
It really, yeah, I think this is going to be, it really does change and again, this isn't something that I necessarily dreamt up. This is
Right.
training that I got, right? But it's one of those things where you go, huh. And if you think back of your conversations and you think about that, when you actually said that, can I ask a question? Actually kind of inserting that little tidbit,
Hmm.
as you reflect on that, you'll see that you've had more effective or more enjoyable conversations
Yeah.
because of those little cues. And this is so it's really interesting, and it's one of the lessons here is active listening goes both ways, and in introducing confirmations through the message, the kind of feedback loop helps to ensure that everybody's on the same page and that we're taking away from the conversation.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm also just picturing this being a great strategy for those of us that have teenagers, right?
Oh yeah.
Like I know
Yeah.
Karen does. I was just thinking because sometimes as a parent, you can be kind of reactive, right? Like you just kind of jump in, and so it's a good reminder to just say, kind of frame it before you jump right in.
Yeah, for sure. In life in general, if
Just
there's
in life, yeah,
one thing, Leslie, I've noticed, and my wife is works in healthcare as well.
yeah.
If there's one thing I've noticed from healthcare is just the tremendous pressure to create positive outcomes.
Mm,
Like you're so strapped for time constantly, right? Like, time is the only thing you don't have enough of,
yeah,
and because of that, there's, I think, a certain level of anxiety, and that just drives. So
yeah.
the idea of slowing down to speed up is, I think, really
Oh,
important in
brilliant.
our environment, and introducing these confirmations. It's counterintuitive, right? But you're going to actually find it's going to be easier for you, and you're going to get better outcome from your patients if you really slow down to take that. But I see it all the time, and I think when you were practicing, it's like people are looking for that quick fix, right? The
Yeah,
blue pill, like, hey, I need to know, just give me a list, and I'm going to go do it. And you're like,
yeah,
hey, that's a slippery slope.
yeah.
Let's try and kind of focus on slowing down to speed up. I think that's another really great concept, to slowing down to speed up. It's hard, but it's a really good one. Okay. So there's two key skills of coaching, right? Active listening and good questions. So we just talked about active listening. We're going to talk about good questions, but I also wanted to pause a little bit and talk about this coaching spectrum. And this is something that I've seen a lot, and I think it's really important to introduce here, especially in healthcare, is that there's two, like, you have this spectrum of what you're doing with patient engagements. One of them, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like training and instructing is very diagnostic. You're looking at reports and readouts and things like that,
Mhm.
taking in all this information and second kind of primary data that's about the customer or patient, and you're using that to create a care package, right? And to
Mhm.
create a plan of attack. So that's very diagnostic. That's really training, instructing. Super,
Right.
super, super important. On the other end of the spectrum, you have cognitive coaching. Cognitive coaching is really root cause coaching. So working with your patient so that they understand, why is the care plan important?
Mm,
What are the barriers that they're going to, internal, external barriers that they're going to run into as they try and execute on this care package? And for you, it's really, as a practitioner, is in installing confidence and installing accountability, self accountability for your patients,
mhm.
so that they do the work. And then so it's really, you're training and instructing here, cognitive coaching here, and throughout the spectrum of your engagements, you have to switch your gears, right? Like, in the middle of a conversation, in a 30-minute hour conversation, you could be doing some training and you could be doing some coaching.
Right.
If we look back at active listening, it's super effective to switch those gears and do it cognitively, kind of consciously. So, hey, I'm going to switch gears. Can I introduce some, prescriptive, can I introduce an idea here? Like, again, taking those pauses in your conversation as you're switching gears, like, so very similar with when you're going from fourth to fifth, and I don't know if we used to drive standard, right? You got to hit the clutch and kind of
Right.
move. If you don't hit the clutch, the gear isn't gonna, your car's not gonna respond. And you can think of the clutch as that framer, right? Can I introduce this? When you're switching out of coaching and switching
Mhm.
into instructing, I personally, I think a lot of people frame coaching as instructing, and I think that does a disservice
Oh,
to
yeah.
us as coaches, as well as to people receiving coaching, because coaching is not about you and I doing the heavy lifting.
Right.
It's about us guiding, right? So just a little thing about that. I don't know if that resonates with you or kind of how that lands. Okay,
Oh yeah.
great.
Oh, for sure. It's 100% resonates. I think it's really powerful. Incidentally, just as we go through, we did have a question here, and I'm not
Sure.
sure if now is the time or later.
Yeah. No,
But
now.
just to keep this in mind, so I think Tammy has an interesting question,
Okay.
how to engage in active listening with clients who, are maybe like on the autism spectrum, maybe have some neurodivergent, challenges going on.
Hmm.
So this seems to be where she is struggling. Do not know how to answer that question in full honesty.
I will, like, I guess, so the answer that I would say is where are you finding friction? Like,
Okay.
that would be my first response to any question is like, well, what, where is the friction
Okay.
happening?
Yeah.
However, we're dealing with a very specific, um, like kind of patient population. And I would almost think that, I would reflect on a kind of a coaching practice that focuses specifically on that, right? Because I think that might be some unique aspects of coaching
Mhm.
to deal with that population.
Right.
Um, I think some of the things that come to the top of my head is just the idea of kindness and patience, right?
Mhm.
So I think that has a big part of it. And if, as a coach, you're being patient and kind, I think that you can kind of potentially get through those things, right? Probably not a great answer, but and we can certainly delve in
Yeah.
if you want to kind of poke around on where those friction points are for you. But it is a very specific population, and I would imagine that there's some specific practices that you
Right.
would use with that population. And I think it depends on, like, when you're talking about that, there's a spectrum as well, right? So what I would suggest is that what we're talking about here will work as a broad stroke for all populations, but just like every population, there are some specifics that you might need to get into, and I'd be happy to do a little research and follow up with you on that.
Awesome.
Is that
Good.
a fair answer?
That's a great answer.
Okay. All right. So we have this idea of changing thinking, right? So you put out a care package, you need someone to actually, or protocol, you need them to actually adopt that, right? So
Mhm.
we need to change the thinking. So you need to change people's thinking. And the best way to do that is judgment-free, open-ended questions. I love the concept of judgment-free, open-ended questions, especially the judgment part of it.
Mhm.
A judgment, I think, is a negative word or often has a negative connotation. I think in healthcare, it is hard not to judge in two ways. And I actually don't think judgment, I think we're trained in our profession or in healthcare specifically. If you switch that word judgment a bit to being like a diagnostic, like, this is what you need to do, right? That kind of thing. So it's really, really, I think in our world, in such a fast-paced environment, you need to really breathe deep and kind of move forward with these ideas of open-ended questions, right? So let's look at creating a good question. So these are kind of the three steps that you would take to create a good question. Okay. So number one is constructing the question, and that really what we're talking about when you're constructing a question is the words that you're using and how the question is put together. Okay. So
Mhm.
how are you today is, like, that's a good way to start. How are you today is better than have you had a good day, right? So just the way you frame your questions from a yes and no up to a what if is really helps to open the conversation up. And the exciting thing about questions is depending on the stage you're in your engagement or your conversation, different questions come about, right? So I think everybody knows that why questions are very powerful questions. The one thing that find really interesting is that why is a double-edged knife. And just before I go into it, does anybody know why is a double-edged knife when it comes to asking powerful questions?
Maybe because the other person can feel interrogated.
Yeah, that's certainly one
Part of
idea.
it.
Anybody else have any ideas? Yeah. So interrogation for sure, Leslie, is the one thing. And I think interrogation actually leads into this idea of why, if you're asking, they're using the word why in a situation of why did you do that? That's you're creating defensiveness, right?
Ah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So what happens with why is we're depending on how you've the way that where you are in your conversation and what you're trying to get to, why can actually shut down that discovery process and switch your coachee's thinking into I need to defend this what I did
Mhm.
versus I need to figure out what it was I was trying to accomplish or what it was that I was that I was trying to like what was driving those decisions, right?
Yeah, so
So
Karen, if you can see, Karen, says, "Why sounds kinda judgy."
it it
It really does,
it
right?
yeah, it does. But I think this is a fun place to stop, like, or to kind of have a
Uh-huh.
conversation. Is like, what are some of the common why questions that you might use? And again, we do a lot of this. This is what I
Yep.
spend most of my time thinking about. Is like, what's a common question that you use with why, and
Mm,
how can we change that question to what, how kind of question to
okay,
either reframe the question or get the question out of our deck, right?
'kay.
Maybe it's a question that we should just never ask, and then you just kind of put a line through it, right?
Well, I might ask, "Why is that important to you?" To
Mm,
me, that doesn't it doesn't feel judgy to me, that
mm.
particular question, but maybe it lands that, in a way that's unintended.
Yeah. So the way that I would, this is the question I would ask you. How can you ask that question in a different way without the word why?
Okay. Well, I actually love what Tammy just said, and I do this quite a bit. And I'm curious to the front of a lot of questions,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's
Yeah.
super powerful. I like to change why to I am curious. Curious as to the motivation, behaviors, etc., behind the action
Yeah.
or non-action.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way. That's a good way to do it. But let's just focus on changing the question
Okay.
from why to a different approach. So
Okay.
let's just look at the question again you had was why does that motivate you?
Well,
Was
I
that the
think I
question?
said, why is that important to you?
Right. So you could change that to what makes that important.
Okay.
So and again,
What makes that important?
this is cognitive reasoning. This is
Yeah.
not this is like literally so you could say that or you could use how like how would you change that question why
Yeah.
into a how question?
Okay.
So go.
Hmm. Oh, you're asking me.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
how let's see. Help me out, guys. Why is that important to you? Change that into a how. Um, how is
So
that important to you? I mean, I don't know if it has the
that's close.
same
That's
meaning
close.
exactly. How
You
I don't know. Let's see. When did that become important to you?
great. That's a great one. That now, and when you if you use that question, you're kind of following a path, right? And I think what we're getting at here is it's really useful to actually have these lists and really think about this when you get the chances because indefinitely why if used in the wrong context can really impact your conversations especially with your audiences and your populations. A lot of the time in healthcare you're dealing with people under inherent pressure from all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you get into a situation in a health situation, it can be very embarrassing. Like whether you should be embarrassed or not, that's not the point.
A lot
It
of
can
shame.
be. I believe, right? Is that
There
a
is
fair
there's a lot
assumption?
of yeah, there's a lot of, inherent change or, shame, and I would say
Yeah.
especially with our audience here today, because for the most part, they're dealing with, food, eating on some
Oh
level,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And body
Hmm.
image and, symptoms, and there can be a lot of layers of shame.
Hmm. Okay. So the other thing you could say is, how does that serve you?
Oh,
And
okay. Ooh.
and again,
Ooh,
maybe if you're
how does
saying
that
how does it
serve
serve
you?
you, people might be out there saying, well, wait a minute, what comes before that and what comes after that? You're like, yeah, well, you're trying to get to that root cause,
Okay.
right? and we're all familiar with root cause, right? Again, from a diagnostic
Right.
perspective, we're Sherlock when it comes to root cause stuff, right? You can look at a
Yeah.
blood output, and you can kind of like, people are awesome at that, and like, boom, I got it. I've seen
Right.
this before, that kind of thing. But with root cause analysis on a human being and their thinking, especially with eating, I would guess, like I think personally, getting to those root causes can actually uncover a lot of things that you would never uncover unless you were really kind of, to your point, being curious is very, very
Yeah.
important. That's one of the core tenets of coaching is curiosity. Um, Curiosity though can certainly take you down. Uh, you can be too curious,
Yeah.
right? So
True.
you can just end up kind of asking kind of random questions. All of a sudden, your time's up, and you're like, "Oh boy, I've learned
Right.
a lot about you," but we didn't really get, because you're there to serve and drive, right? So I
Right.
think curiosity is another one where it's
Well, it can
super,
come
super
across as
important.
maybe self-serving,
J- Yeah,
possibly.
some people, yep, some people will use curiosity, and that's kind of the idea of you already know the answer,
Yeah.
right? Right. So, and I'm sure I'll lay this out and we'll see how many people have done this. When you're listening to somebody and they're explaining something to you, halfway through what they're explaining, your mind said, "Oh, I got an answer." And you're essentially waiting for them to finish talking so you can give them the answer. Does that ever
Right.
happen to anybody here?
Yes.
No. Like, always. Like, it happens a lot. It happens to me too. That is not active listening, right? So you've actually switched out. That's a whole different concept, but it's really the idea of really being in the moment, taking those breaths, right? So there's a lot of mindfulness comes to this, and kind of creating those questions as you go and really listening. And those feedbacks that we talked about earlier, those confirmations, stops you from jumping ahead too quickly, right? Okay, so we talked kind of about less powerful, more powerful questions. The second thing is scope, right? And when you get into scope, you're talking about what phase of the process you're in, and what is it that you want to discover and uncover. So if we look, so we're going to kind of flip back and forth a little bit here.
Okay.
Um, this is the coaching model that we used at Royal Roads, which was the accelerated coaching model. It comes from a company, Impact Coaching. This is another coaching model, and I think there's the goal model. I know. So, and Leslie, I'm going to guess you're familiar with motivational interviewing. Is that
Yeah.
a term that
Yes,
yeah? So I
and
think
most of our people here are familiar with that.
yeah, motivational interviewing is a favorite tool
Yeah.
in healthcare that I find. I have lots of exciting conversation. My wife was actually sending me screen caps from her motivational training and saying, "I think you should use this in your presentation today." And
Yeah.
I think, are you guys familiar with appreciative inquiry? Is that a term that you're familiar with?
I am, uh, but I'd love to get some feedback from our audience today. Appreciative inquiry as a tool, a coaching tool or strategy.
Yeah.
So I learned that in my coach training.
Okay. Cool. And which coach training did you do?
I did well coaches.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I did both their, their core training. I think that was 4 months, and then I did their advanced training, which is a whole year.
Oh, great. Oh,
So
right on.
yeah,
So I think like that leads into a great question is did you have like, so again, these are kind of these formats of how coaching conversation goes.
yeah,
I think it's super useful to have any format at all, right? So
yeah,
the idea of showing these two formats is there's lots out there.
yeah.
And what I'm curious about is if these kinds of stages resonate with you, Leslie, in the training that you did, because I found that they all kind of are based in this fundamental idea of how to move a conversation forward, like a coaching conversation forward, right?
Right. Hmm.
So we'll talk about these. We'll just use this one as an example.
Sure.
Like if you want to interject kind of any differences in some of the ways you approach it is absolutely, the more different ways of looking at things, the more effective you're going to be. But they have this idea of engage, enlighten, empower, excel. I think they have
Okay.
inspire. They've added a fifth there, right? So engage is really straightforward, safe environment, right? So I think most likely we're all under confidentiality agreements and things like
Hmm.
that when we're talking to our patients. You'd be surprised that I think number one, in some cases, it's regulated that you actually bring that up, but number two, it makes people feel a lot more comfortable after you've said that, right? So hey, everything we talk about here is between you and me. I don't share it
Hmm.
with anyone. I can't be compelled to share with anyone without your consent. Do you
Right.
understand that? Do you have any questions? As trivial as that seems, it can make a big difference. Would you agree?
Like 100%. 100%. It's often simply implied, right?
Yep.
But I do see the value in articulating it because I really think could give that other person sigh of relief, right?
Yeah, the articulation I think is key because that's you want the other person to be as comfortable as they can because the conversation actually, if you're having a good coaching conversation, it's gonna get uncomfortable. There are gonna be parts of the conversation that you are gonna need to guide your the coachee through that are sometimes uncomfortable, especially as when you're kind of right in this area of enlightening and empowering, right?
Yeah.
When you're focusing on root cause, that can be uncomfortable. It is not uncommon for tears to be shed at that phase of the project,
Right.
right? Because root cause analysis is really around what is it that's driving your behavior here? Or
Mhm.
on the other hand, is what is it that you want to accomplish here today? And what does that mean to you?
Mm.
Right? What does that mean to you? At the end of our 30-minute conversation, what's one thing that you really want to accomplish? Okay. And
Mm.
how would that make things different? Or
Incredible.
what impact will that have on the rest of your day potentially, or those kinds of things, right? So when you're in that enlightened phase and focusing on root cause, your goal as a coach is to continue to open the conversation and ensure that you're grounded in the right place, right? So is there anything else that might be more important, right? Just to kind of ground those conversations, right? And
Mm.
then once you've grounded the conversation, then you get into this idea of empowerment. And again, the really interesting thing here I find with a lot of coaches is you'll inherently take ownership of things that you shouldn't take ownership of. And through
Oh,
all the training we did, is that's where you always got stuck was either ownership, and then there's these other little tidbits of question. I would imagine that some of the folks here, are you familiar with stacking? The concept of stacking questions?
no. I mean, I
Oh,
kinda can imagine what that means, but I don't think I've been formally, introduced to the idea.
right. So, well, it's awesome. Like that was just kind of an idea of stacking. But the idea of stacking questions is you ask one question and you ask another question, another question, another question, kind of in, in almost, it's like you're building a bigger question than your first question.
Okay.
Whereas the idea is keep your questions simple, concise, and driven by the feedback coming from your coachee,
Okay.
right? So everything feeds from the coachee, right? So if you're in that enlightened phase and you're identifying the root cause, that sometimes you can actually spend, if you have a 30-minute coaching conversation, we were doing 20-minute coaching conversations, you could spend 7, 8, 10 minutes on that enlightened, focusing on the root cause.
Yeah.
Once you have that locked in, all the other steps of the conversation become a little easier. And for you, the trick is ensuring that is the root cause, right? Because
Okay.
sometimes you can get into the empower phase and things will come up and you're like, well, how does that relate to this? And maybe things will shift, right? So you
Mhm.
want to really get that root cause in place
Mhm.
and start moving that forward. And then, when you're in the empower phase, it's that idea of adrenaline. And again, for you, you're like, okay, what might stop you? Like what might stop you?
Right.
That's the question, right? And now you're leaving it open for the coachee to kind of explore in their mind that very simple question, which is actually pretty powerful, right? So, Leslie, a conversation you have is what might stop you, and a coachee might give you some feedback, and you're like, well, what's the next question you ask, right? And what would be an example of a question that you would ask, based on that? Is like, okay, um, what tools do you have at your disposal to help with that,
Oh, love that.
right? That might be a good one, right?
So
So
what might stop you? Like, what are some potential, maybe obstacles? So
yeah,
basically, you're trying to troubleshoot a little bit in advance, right?
you're trying to get them to troubleshoot,
Yes, yes, yes.
right?
You're
Yeah.
trying to get that client to put themselves in that position of taking action and thinking in advance what might the obstacles be, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
then
That's
what was the
exactly it.
follow-up question that you said?
What tools do you have
Okay,
to address that, right? Or what can you do to overcome that,
love that.
right? So that's really good. I want to make sure that I think we have till 2:30, right?
We do.
Okay, so I want to make sure that
I
we're
honestly, I have a feeling this is such a great topic. Oh my
well, I want to make
god.
sure that this is a good point to pause
Okay.
and make sure that we're finding value here,
Yes. Okay.
and we're not missing things that are really important to people. Because I like again, I think everybody, especially now that we're in holiday season, everybody's probably really busy. So I want to make sure that is that fair? Just to make sure that is
Fair
everybody
enough.
okay with what we're doing
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Yeah. Any feedback? Anything that we really want to zero in on at this point? And I'm asking the audience. Karen, Tammy, I know there's some other people on, but I cannot see your names, unfortunately. This is super, super helpful for me, but I want to
Yeah.
hear from you guys. There's a little bit of a lag time. Keep going. Love it, Karen.
Yeah. Okay. So then you get into this idea of Excel, right? So you kind of identified some of these barriers to success, and a lot of times when we get into Excel, again, as a coach, we're taking back the conch, we're taking back ownership. This is what I'm going to do to help you keep it going, and that again is one of the things you want to really avoid. You're like, okay, so what are you going to do? What can you do to ensure to succeed, right? And the other part of that that's really interesting is not only talking about what are you going to do to succeed, how do you handle setbacks?
Oh,
Because it's going to happen, right? And
right.
again, you do not want your coachee to get in a situation where they don't show up for the next session. I don't know how often that happens. I would imagine it happens more often than you'd like.
It does
But
happen for people.
yeah, yeah, if
Because
someone has a set of goals from their trusted source and they don't achieve those goals, they'll ghost, right? I think that's a
they
term.
will. Because again, I think there's that sense of shame and embarrassment, and
Yeah,
oh, I
yeah.
don't want to be like scolded, or I don't want to feel bad. I'm just going to disappear. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, and just to so there's two frames there. Number one, realistic action plans and self accountability. A lot of that comes down to how are you going to handle failure? Because if you have that conversation, it's going to make your coachee a lot more comfortable with that idea. Not that you want them to fail, but that happens.
Yeah.
It happens. Like try, fail, learn, right? That's I think one of the things we all subscribe to if you're successful is try, fail, learn, try, fail, learn, try, succeed, learn, right? You just got to keep trying and moving and shifting, and you're going to get there if you have the right mindset and you're employing the right tools. But don't let failure get in the way of moving forward, right?
Mhm.
So, and self accountability is how are you going to hold yourself accountable? What if that doesn't work? Who do you have around you that you can like all these kinds of conversations really help. And the one thing that it just draw me back to is remembering is coaching is all the coaches when they would do their initial conversations, they would introduce a very personal aspect of their life to really show that kind of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think one of the great things that a lot of people in the healthcare industry have is a lot of story. A lot of health coaches, nutrition coaches, have a similar story to that person.
Mhm.
Right? I went through the same thing. I had a digestive issue, or I had something like this, and that's what drove me into this space. Being aware of that and sharing that in a concise way can actually create a very comfortable environment for coachees.
Yeah.
So I know I would always suggest not getting too detailed about it, but depending on time and stuff like that.
Right.
So
Love
this
that.
is kind of a summary of all that stuff, right? So these are actionable questions you can ask yourself to figure out how to forward a conversation with a coachee, right? Without introducing preconceived notions, without introducing false pretense questions, right? So you know the answer, but you're going to ask them the question because you want them to say it, right? That's not an effective question. That's not. Questions are really based on creating. I really like calling it getting synapses to connect, right? So those little flashes in your mind that are going off when you ask a question are connecting people's synapses so that they actually start to really understand, buy into, and own their solutions, right? So number one is, where are you in the conversation? We just kind of went through that spectrum. I think a great one is this question relevant to real life? So, that idea is, does the question have purpose in moving forward the conversation, right? Is it genuine? I think that's another really great way of looking at it, is like, if you already know the answer, don't like reframe the question, right? In fact, ask the question, if you know the answer, maybe a better way to frame the question is, I'm wondering, do you feel this way? Right?
Hmm.
So you're switching it so that, and to be honest with you, do you feel this way? What kind of question is that? I just did
Closed.
it. That's a yes, no,
Closed
right?
probe.
So
It's closed
I blew
probe.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to flip that to say, what do you think of this, maybe, or
Yes.
something like that, right?
Okay.
What is need, what
Or
is
how's
needed
this
next?
landing?
Pardon me?
Or how is this
Yeah, how's
landing?
this landing? That's one of my favorite ways to. I'm not sure. I think, and again, you can actually do this if you're on the phone or you watch the cues.
Mhm.
How's it landing is like my favorite thing. Sometimes I wonder if, depending on the background of the person you're talking to, if they understand that. But I love
Right.
it. I've used that.
Right.
I probably actually. I think I actually said that to you earlier today. I was like, how does this land for you,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
It's one
what
of my
is needed
go-tos.
next? What is needed next is a really good one. So this is what you're thinking about,
Ooh.
right? So you're trying to move the conversation forward. So you might have something you want to ask that you're really interested in, but pause and think about, is this what my coachee needs? And how do I move this conversation forward? Right? Because
Right.
I need them to I need them to do this stuff, right? And my favorite part about my favorite question to ask, and the one that I've learned through lots of missteps, is what's missing.
Ooh.
It knowledge or motivation. There's lots of things that can be missing, but I think you can sum them up into those two groups: knowledge and motivation. And it changes the question. If you're thinking through a conversation or preparing for a conversation, and the answer to what's missing is knowledge, you're potentially shifting out of coaching and back into instructing, consulting, which is fine. But
Right.
know that going into the conversation, because if knowledge is missing, you should just come outright, frame it in a way where you're providing that knowledge, take off your coaching hat, because things can, if you're trying to get, like, it's just easier that way and it's more authentic,
How
right?
do you do
So,
that? Like what? Because I think that is a really important component of what we're talking about. Because
yep,
we're suggesting that as a practitioner, we probably are going to go back and forth, right?
yep, yep.
People want to tap into your expertise,
Hmm.
and we're trying to move the behaviors forward through the coaching process. So when you're switching into the expert role, the practitioner role,
Hmm.
how would you recommend we do that?
So I would, again, if you look at that, the way a conversation works, I would frame it, or this is some of the things that I do, right? So I would
Yep.
say, um, would it be helpful for me to share some practical steps?
Okay.
That's one way to do it,
Great. Yeah.
right? So it's a closed question for sure, but you're getting the attention, and you're changing gears, right?
It
And
frames it.
you're letting the coachee understand that's framing. Or I'd like to share some ideas I have, or hey, can I that's how you kind of shift out of this. You could even be like, so I think it's fair to say, I feel like it looks like you're struggling.
Mhm.
Can I share some perspective? Right?
Okay.
Those kinds of things. Again, it looks like you're struggling. That's the opening pretty. When you go, is that really what I want to say? But then all this stuff is very dependent on what's happening. Like
Yeah.
active listening involves a lot of body language and things like that. So, but you can certainly, those are some of those, can I share with you, or I'd
Yeah,
like to
I
share
love
with
that.
you, or here's what I've seen works,
Okay.
right? Or this has worked for other, this kind of stuff. So that's how I would do it.
Okay.
If it's motivation, if what's missing is motivation, that's pure coaching. That's like, motivation is something that is certainly coaching related. Knowledge is very much more instructional. And I've seen this, the whole idea of the coaching spectrum, which I'm sure it's out there, but this is really something I thought about, was working with sales reps.
Mhm.
Junior sales reps, they don't, coaching can sometimes really fall apart because they don't know, right? They've never then I think, Leslie, in a former life, you worked in the sales kind of
I
revenue
did,
area. So
yeah,
like junior guys, they just need, tell me what to do. And I will,
exactly. Give
and
me a
if you've hired
script.
properly,
Give me a
yeah,
script, and I'll
if
say
you've
it.
hired them, yeah, if you've hired properly, they're going to move in that direction.
Yeah,
Senior, as they move up that course of experience, then the more kind of motivational cognitive stuff is better. Like, what haven't you
right.
tried, or who do you need to talk to? Like these kinds of things. So it really kind of depends on where you are in the conversation. I would imagine that potentially early on in your engagement, maybe a lot of it is instructing, right? Like maybe early on in the engagement, it's very much instructional.
Mhm.
And as they start to adopt those principles and adopt it, then it moves more into motivational coaching and that kind of stuff. I don't,
Mhm. Hmm.
I would leave it up to, I'm certainly interested in the feedback there, but
Yeah.
that's kind of how I would look at it. Okay. So again, just some ideas around what does a powerful question look like? So there's curiosity. So it generates curiosity in the listener, right? So the coachee, um, reflective conversation. So again, that's like kind of the idea of, I'll just maybe take a second and this is like a busy slide with some really interesting things. So maybe take 2 seconds and just
Okay.
look at it, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about these different things.
Okay.
So there's some themes to powerful questions. And if you look at this, there's a lot of really things around stimulating curiosity, deep, evoking more questions. So it's really, you can have a lot of, again, it comes back to the idea the right question in the right place can open up a world of opportunities that you would never, your coachee would never even have thought of. Um, and, I think a lot of people will say, and if anybody in the audience does this, maybe raise your hand. A lot of people will say, "Well, that's a good question," and a lot of people will say that as a filler as they think about how to answer that question. Right?
Right.
It's amazing. I love that. So, as a coach, you do not need filler. Silence is your friend.
Okay.
Right? Like silence is your friend. Don't do your best not to fill things.
Okay.
Do your best to let things land, to your point, Leslie, and do your best to leave it with your coachee to kind of just start the conversation and start thinking through it, right?
Okay.
It's not easy. It doesn't always work. Don't be afraid to fail. Like maybe you do need to do something, but the idea is really to let these things, like really thought-provoking questions, and kind of moving forward kind of like that. So these are kind of generative questions. Is that a
Oh,
familiar
it
term for
is,
everybody?
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
and in the, well coaching model, like, that
Yeah,
is a specific piece of the conversation.
for sure.
They call it the generative moment.
Mm, awesome. So what is the
And
generative
it's
moment?
difficult. I mean, I would think, like, as a newer coach, it's difficult to uncover the that moment, right? I think I think it sometimes takes some experience. Well, the generative moment is, I think it's, I don't remember what the exact, definition is, but it's that, it's like the new kind of like, you're uncovering
Hmm.
a big takeaway, but
Yeah,
it's the client who's doing it, of course. You're just asking
yep,
good questions to help get them there. So this is like kind of the turning point in the conversation.
yeah. Let me see if this lands with you. I would call that where the synapses are connecting, right? So
Yeah.
generative questions really, and again, I hope anybody hears neuro linguistic isn't like, hey Jeff, that's not what synapses do. But what I
No, but I
remember
get it. It's like they're
is,
firing.
yeah, connecting the synapses, getting things
Yeah.
connecting helping the client connect things through the questioning
Yeah.
is great. And again, these are some of the concepts of it, right? So discovery, suspending premature judgment. That again in healthcare, I think it's really important for us all to be really really caring with ourselves. It is a tough, tough environment almost all the time. It's incredibly rewarding, but it's also very tough. Judgment can really be, the way that I would frame judgment is knowing the answer before you've actually asked the question. That's I think a good way to look at
Okay.
judgment in our environment. It's not necessarily saying judgment in terms of what you're doing, but it's like knowing the answer before you ask the question,
Yep.
you're probably asking the wrong question. That's what I would say to that,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right?
Interesting.
Like if you already know the answer, why are you asking? Why not frame it in a different way or challenge yourself to ask a different question?
Love it.
So this is a really neat example that I had, and it's like this idea of what did we do wrong and who is responsible. This comes from a concept of one of my favorite articles of all time is teaching smart people how to think, and I'll share a link to it. It's like spectacularly interesting. And it's this idea: what did we do wrong versus who is responsible, and what can we learn from what's happened, and what possibilities can we see now? So I think that's a great way to look at a question that is a little judgy and maybe creates a little bit of
Yeah.
defensiveness to this kind of more open question around, hey, what can we learn and how do we move forward? You're probably going to get the threads of responses are potentially going to be similar, but they're going to be created in a different way and they're going to have a different outcome because of the way you frame the question, right? Does
Right.
that make sense?
It does. I love it.
Okay, so these are my we're kind of wrapping up here. I know we're just about the end, but I wanted to share with everyone.
Okay.
This is feedback I got from like Allison Herndon and there's a whole bunch of really popular coaches with this coaching
Okay.
course, and they would listen to what we were doing and then they would give us feedback. And I remember saying, "Are you guys familiar with the growing edge? Are you familiar with that term, the growing
Mm.
edge?"
I don't think so.
So the growing edge is really kind of where you are and where you need to expand, right? So in the coaching course, they would say growing edge a lot. And I remember my first 3 months, I had a conversation with Bill, one of the head coaches, and it's very it was funny because he was saying something that was like, you know what, I got so many growing edges, I feel like I'm crawling up a mountain of sandpaper. And it was funny because he paused and he's like, I never heard it put like that's a very interesting perspective, Jeff. And I was like, I have a bit of comedy in me. I'm lightheaded. And he's like, it's not okay. I get it. Anyway, so this is some of the feedback that I've gotten. We talked a little about stacking, which I think is an
Yes.
important concept that we all do. But these are some of the other things. You know, from a first conversation,
Yep.
what do they really want, right?
Okay.
So they're coming to you and they have a health condition.
Right.
They want to fix that health condition for sure, but what do they really want, and kind of digging into how did they get there and these kinds of things, and what, like, that stuff is really, that's where root cause comes in, and that's where you can really fix the underlying problem that's creating the symptoms. Does that
Is
make
this
sense?
a what do you want? What do you really want? Big picture? Or is it what do you want today from the session?
It depends on where you are in the
Okay.
conversation, right? So
Okay. Got it. Yeah.
I think you have two frames there. One is in the actual package, like your however you set up your packages, or
Yeah.
you have X sessions, and the first conversation is what are we working towards, right?
Got
Like,
it.
so,
Yep.
and then in each session you may have it broken up modularly, right? So
Okay.
it actually works in layers, but it really is digging into that
Right.
idea of root cause, right? Not symptoms, causes. And again, I think that should resonate, but if you flip it and apply it to questions, it actually opens up some new thinking.
Yep.
Be careful of asking questions and answering them yourself. That's not good.
Okay.
So don't suggest things,
Okay.
right? Turn that stuff into a question. The idea of having the client summarize. So this is one thing that I do a lot, and it's like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. This is what we came up with. And that's the salesperson in me and the leader in me. And you're like, no, you're better to actually get them to summarize, your coachee or whoever you're talking to summarize it, because it makes it more powerful for them. Here's a good one around the contracting, kind of that first stage. If we spent time on this, what would you like to work out? Right. It's a really good question. If we spend time on this thing you brought out, where does it go? This idea of keeping your observations shorter and getting right to the question.
Yep.
So if you're in these conversations, again, everything's different. It really depends on where you are with your practice or what you're trying to get to. But for you want to do as little talking as possible, right? There's this concept in coaching of wait. And the acronym is why am I talking? Why am I talking? That's wait. Why am I talking? Why am I talking? Right. So really focusing on the coach.
Oh, I used to have a sticky note on my computer. Be quiet.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Kind of the same thing, right? Be
Yeah, for
honest.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. So, and it's this
Yeah.
idea, if you got a suggestion brewing, and this is feedback directly from my
Yeah.
coaches, like, what do
So
you think you
good.
can do about this? Rather than giving a suggestion, what do you think you can do about that?
Okay.
Or flipping that question around a bit.
So good.
Okay. So I think we're a little over. I have other things we can talk about, but again, I want to be really respectful of time. And
Yeah.
Leslie, what I'm going to do is I will send you this deck
Okay.
before the end of the day. And
Beautiful.
in the deck,
Woo!
I have a list of, I'll share all the goodies that I have, all the
Okay.
questions that I have, and I'll share
Amazing.
links to all the articles I'm referencing,
Okay.
the interesting books there. Like, I think coaching is one of the most important skills we have.
Yeah.
It's a great additive skill to all the diagnostic knowledge that we have, and it
Yeah.
really is transformational, right? So, and it cannot be replaced by computers. I know there'll be AI people that will question that, and that's fine. But
No.
I think it's humans are humans, right?
I
So,
love it.
do you feel
So
like we
good.
got to where
I
we wanted to
do.
be here?
I do. I do. I'm getting so much feedback. Tammy, this is great. I'll be rewatching this many times.
Oh, nice.
Similar comment from Karen. So I think, Jeff, I don't know, you and I might want to have a conversation around doing a workshop or something related to
Sure.
coaching, right? Like an
Yeah,
actual
sure.
workshop. And I have to
Mhm.
share with you just really quick. This has gotten me fired up to, I don't know, gosh, maybe kind of dip my toe into a little bit more coach training because it's just so powerful. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll chat with you about that offline. But it's, great feedback from everyone. Amazing presentation. Thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom. This is such an incredible skill to develop. And it's a game changer, both in your personal lives as well as helping your clients move forward. Just this coaching skill alone. Wow. Amazing. All right, guys. So
Great.
we do need to wrap up. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to go back in and I'll share the links in the comments on all the different Facebook pages and everywhere that we're streaming today. And I will
Mhm.
also share your contact information, Jeff,
Sure.
should there be folks that want to reach out. Okay. I
Yeah,
assume it's
absolutely.
Jeff. Is your email jeff@mealgarden.com?
It's jeff.lougheed@mealgarden.com.
Gotcha. Okay.
And like I said, Leslie, I've got, I'll send over a link to the deck, and I'll include some really good questions and some really good links if people are curious about learning more about these things.
Okay.
I'll give you all the information that you can to continue learning. And I'm
All right.
this is my favorite topic, so I'm happy to always talk about this. And it's great opportunity to learn for everybody, right? So I love it.
It is.
Happy
All right.
holidays, everyone.
All right, guys. Take good care. Bye for now. See you next week. And thanks again, Jeff. We'll have to
You're very welcome.
reconnect
Take care.
soon. Bye.
Yep, for sure. Bye-bye.